Well, if you were hoping, wishing that things might be different from the Spanish Grand Prix onwards, because this is the race in which a new technical revision is coming into play, in which the front and rear wings are being subjected to higher tests in terms of flexibility, and therefore, if McLaren had some sort of secret advantage in that area, maybe from the Spanish Grand Prix onwards, it wasn't going to be so clear. Well, if that's what you're thinking, I'm afraid there's bad news, certainly from Friday anyway, in the build-up to the Spanish Grand Prix at Barcelona. McLaren-Mercedes, MCL39, just the class of the racetrack. Absolutely superb. Oscar Piastri quickest on the soft tyre, but even more impressive was Lando Norris on a 10-lap old set of medium tyres, doing a high 18 right at the end of the long runs at the end of FP2. Everybody else was doing 19s, 20s, 21s. If anything said this is a McLaren weekend, it was that. Of course, lots could happen as the weekend develops, but just to reflect on what I've just been talking about, have a look at these notices put out by the teams to the FIA, which have been made public, which reflect the teams' changes on their specific cars at this race around that new regulation. So yeah, here's the Ferrari notice. Front wing load redistributions phased with the update of the technical regulations. Rear wing outboard tip and roll geometries. Yeah, okay, well that's that one. Red Bull front wing revised geometry to gain stiffness at minimal weight cost and iterated to pursue the load characteristics sought. Yeah, well, fair enough. A bit of a mouthful in terms of what they're trying to say, I think, but I get the gist of it. Mercedes rear wing circuit-specific increased camber to gain local downforce and drag along an efficiency slope appropriate to Barcelona, said in true Mercedes tradition. Here's Aston Martin. We'll include them as well because we know Adrian Newey is a big player there now. Aston Martin front wing, main wing sections revised for compliance with latest technical regulations. So about what you'd expect. So let's see what McLaren have said and declared about their cars at the Spanish Grand Prix. McLaren, no updates submitted for this event. Absolutely fait accompli. Thank you and good night. Nothing more to be said. Not only are they super quick still, but they're also saying, well, we've been legal all along, so why do we need to make any changes to the front wings? It's only the Red Bulls, the Ferraris, and everybody else that's got to make modifications. So if that isn't depressing news for all the opposition of McLaren, I don't know what is. I think we're left to just look at the battle between Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri, because at least that's a good motor race between two quick drivers in a very good car, identical cars in terms of their race with one another. And it was pretty evenly split today. Oscar Piastri quicker on the soft tyre. I'd love to be able to talk about it, but F1 TV in their wisdom, while Oscar was going for that lap on a new set of softs, were following Lance Stroll, and it was a little bit like that today. Quite difficult to see what a lot of the drivers were doing because of the camera angles we were getting and the corners we weren't seeing. As I said in the build-up to this race, by far and away the most technically interesting part of the Barcelona circuit and the most demanding in terms of what one driver can do really well and perhaps another can't, is that section out of turn 2 into turn 3, the change of direction. Turn 3 is really important because it's basically flat in 6th gear. Well, it is flat in 6th gear, and that leads on to a bit of a straight as well. So how you come out of 2 and how you go into 3, really critical. And 3, obviously there's a lot of lateral load. It's a quick corner, and you've got to ask as little of the car as possible in that change of direction. You've got to get the car settled. And that's what Max Verstappen was doing beautifully today in the Red Bull, a car that Yuki Tsunoda on soft tyres said had absolutely zero grip front and rear. But Max somehow found a sweet spot in terms of grip level, nothing like the same balance or overall downforce as the McLaren. It was very clear to the eye. But Max in turn 2, lovely little bit of additional steering lock, coming out with slight understeer, the way he was massaging that understeer, absolutely beautiful to watch, allowing him then to have a virtually straight exit from 2 and almost to line it up into 3 without any change of direction at all. Contrast that with, say, the Liam Lawsons of this world, the Carlos Sainzes, the Alex Albons, even, I've got to say, the Oscar Piastris, who are going to the right coming out of 2, and then a big ask as the change of direction to the left, loading up the left rear, and then going into the right. Oliver Behrman had a big spin in the Haas Ferrari at exactly that moment. In his defense, there were 2 cars on the inside, and probably who's a little bit offline, got a little bit on the marbles in doing that. But nonetheless, it was a very good indication of how much is asked of the car if you do one of these wide exits from 2 and then a late turn in into 3. And I would say 75% of the field are doing that. And it's only right at the top that we're seeing the Charles Leclercs, the Max Verstappens, to some extent the Lando Norris. Well, let's go back to that battle between Lando and Oscar Piastri. As I said, at the moment, that could be the battle of the race. It could be the only battle of the race. Well, that's not strictly true. I think Red Bull, Mercedes and Ferrari just behind them look relatively closely matched now. George Russell was very good, and Antonelli not far behind him in FP2 today as well, but we'll get onto that in a second. In terms of Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris through 2 and 3, I think Lando's got the technique that's going to be a little bit kinder to his tyres over a long distance. Of course, all of that could be completely nullified by whoever's in front and who's behind and who's got dirty air and who's got clean air. But putting that to one side, this is a good example of sometimes when we talk about short corners and why don't some drivers do it and others do. I try to make the point that it's all about the ability of the driver and his technique and his ability to feel the front end and massage what the front end's doing, not only with steering, but also with decreasing brake pedal pressure against steering load and getting that absolutely right. Different every lap, different every corner. But Lando definitely has that feel, I think, slightly better touch than Oscar Piastri in that specific area. Oscar very good in other areas. But in that specific area, we're seeing Lando there today into doing exactly that, almost the same as Max Verstappen, the additional lock he's giving the car. And he's coming out not quite as straight as Max, not quite as straight in exits, got a little bit of a curve to it. Lando always thinks in curves, Max in straight lines. But Lando's coming out, he's got a very gradual curve, and then he doesn't come over much. Comes over right of centre for turn 3. It looks really good. Whereas Oscar is getting on the power a little bit sooner. He's braking a little bit later. I said, that's one area where he's always going to be super good. Brakes later into 1, got the wide entry into 1, wide entry into 2. He's got a little bit more slide on the car, a little bit of oversteer, which he holds beautifully, not with opposite lock, just with throttle control. But then coming out, he's got more of a curve on the car, but then he straightens the wheel and runs absolutely straight on acceleration. So he's going, that's 4th gear when they're doing that in turn 2. He's going 4th, 5th, and then getting 6. And just as he's getting 6, he's moving slightly to the left. But that move to the left is more abrupt than anything Lando's doing. And they're both going, I'd say Oscar's going more to the left, maybe over the centre of the road, just on centre, going into 3 as well. So there's a difference. And it was quite amusing, actually. At the beginning of the first run, when they were on mediums, at the beginning of FP2, Oscar was slower generally than Lando on the medium tyre. But he was quickest in Sector 1. He went purple in Sector 1, although it was disguised because both Lando and Max had traffic on mediums in their run. So Tom Stallard got on the radio to his engineer, got onto Oscar and said, it might amuse you to know that you're actually purple in Sector 1 at the moment. And Oscar said something like, in typical Black Jack Brabham mode, oh, well, yeah, so drifting the car does work there then. Yeah, it's good. Which is obviously, he's not going to slide the car any more than he wants to. But Oscar definitely is using the McLaren MCL39 as much as he possibly can there, maybe a little bit too much. And whether the tyres will take that over a longer distance is another matter. But on the soft tyre, incredibly good. Lando did have traffic, and that has to be borne in mind. Not massive traffic on his quickest lap, and Oscar getting a lot out of the tyres in Sector 3 as well. In general, Barcelona at the moment with these cars and with the television angles they've got, I find quite frustrating because that great bit of road, turn 2, turn 3, is right at the beginning of the lap. And typically with the directors these days, they're looking at the segments and they're saying, oh, he's on a quick lap, let's go and watch him. By the time they've realised it and they're on him, it's like turn 6, turn 7, and all the good stuff is over. And if you watch the cars anywhere from turn 4 onwards, really, they all look pretty much on rails. And if you didn't know the lap time they were doing and you were following, say, Lewis Hamilton on a lap, and then you were following, I don't know, Liam Lawson on a lap, and then you were following Lando Norris on a lap, they'd all look pretty similar. They're all basically doing the same thing. They're kind of line locked into what they're doing. Obviously, the grip levels are different from team to team, and that's what distinguishes them in terms of lap time. But in terms of the rest of the lap, they're not doing a lot different from one another. Yeah, Charles Leclerc has the odd moment on exit of turn 9, the quick right-hander. So did Lewis Hamilton once on his quickest lap, actually, when he said the car was pretty much undrivable. But it didn't look undrivable. That's the thing. I guess that's what I'm trying to get around to say. They always say, oh, Barcelona, very technical track. I never really understand what they mean by that. But I think what they possibly mean is there's nothing you can do because the corner just defines where you're going to place the car. The only place is that section from 2 to 3 where it's change of direction, and how you do that change of direction is absolutely critical because as you come out of 2, what you do out of 2 into 3 affects everything you do right up into turn 4. And that's a long bit of road there. Very, very fast bit of road. So, yeah, it was a bit frustrating watching all that, but there was one glimpse of Max, of what he was doing there. Absolutely beautiful. Didn't see Charles Leclerc there close up enough to make a comment, but I suspect he's pretty good through there, and he's pretty much like Max, pretty linear as distinct from curvaceous. But yeah, when you're following cars side on, it's very, very difficult to see it. So it's kind of a shame, I think, that on a circuit where there is that great bit of road, they never show it really. You've really got to be looking maybe from the drone shot above. We did see a little bit of Lando versus Oscar, which is how I described them there. Speed on the straight, pretty much affected by toes. I mean, at one point, Max's fastest through the speed trap was 3.27 compared with Fernando Alonso 3.34 in the Aston Martin. Fernando complaining in FP1 about how slow the car was in a straight line. The McLaren's 3.31, and that you can imagine that's about right. Oscar 3.31, Lando 3.28, probably there or thereabouts. Maybe a toe involved. But then Max, having done 3.27, got a toe from Charles Leclerc on the long runs and did 3.36. So he's quick as the speed trap. There's definitely a toe. Nothing wrong with that, of course, but nonetheless, that was what happened. Anyway, going back to the long runs, wow. Lando Norris with 10-lap-old mediums, 18.7, right at the end of the run, just as they were all coming into the pits to put on soft tyres or whatever to do the standing start. Lando goes 18.5, 18.9, 18.7, 18.8. At the same time, Max is out there doing a 19.9 on softs with the same number of laps on them. So I don't know. What can I say? You know, I'm sure a lot of people are hoping that Red Bull are sandbagging or Mercedes have got a lot more pace and Ferrari are going to get it together. But for every bit of improvement that those three teams make, McLaren can still improve as well, of course. And right now they have a really significant advantage, particularly on race fuel, I would say. I mean, that 18.7 of Lando is just unbelievably quick. Well, destroyingly quick, really. So that was it in a nutshell. Pierre Gasly quick in the Alpine. I thought it was quite amusing at one point when they were following Franco Colapinto, who appears to be struggling in the other Alpine, and with obviously an error. But at one point, a picture of Jack Doohan came up with the graphic Jack Doohan, and we saw Colapinto running over a curb and running wide. And I imagine Jack saying, "Well, I wouldn't have done that, mate. Yeah, no way." Early days, I suppose. He's still got another couple of races to go. But at the moment, missing Jack Doohan on the grid, a lot of cars bunched together as they would. This being a technical circuit, the two racing bulls very close to one another, Isack Hadjar and Liam Lawson. Liam absolutely totally different to Isack when you watch them on the track. We did see a bit of them. Isack much shorter corners and more linear than Liam, but neither Williams massively quick today. Very close together, but not quick. Surprising, really. I suppose they'll say, "Oh well, yeah, you know, Monaco's more our sort of circuit." What does that mean? They've got much better traction than most, and traction's not that important around Barcelona, I guess. But it is a high downforce circuit here, so you'd imagine they'd still be reasonably quick here. We'll see what happens tomorrow with them as well. And Kimi Antonelli, a little bit out in FP1, did a very good job in FP2. So Oscar Piastri, at the moment, quickest on soft tyres. George Russell, very good in the Mercedes. P2, Max Verstappen, P3. Got to say, didn't get a perfect lap, but not far away. Lando Norris, P4. Same could be said for him. Charles Leclerc on the absolute ragged edge of the Ferrari, as ever. Disappointing for them, really. 13.2, half a second slower than a McLaren, actually, with Charles on a good lap. And Lewis Hamilton down in 11th place, 13.5. Before we go, quick shout out to the supporters of this channel, to Track Ninja, to OEM Exclusive, to Jetcraft, and to REC Watches. Don't forget that you can order your REC watch with a 10% discount by mentioning the word Peter. Details in the description below. Big thanks to them again. Big thanks to you for watching. Let's see what happens over the weekend. Will this orange McLaren steamroller, and they've still got the roundels on the car, will it continue? We'll see you over the weekend. McLaren, as predicted, dominated qualifying today. Obviously, it was not perfect for them. It never is for any race team, even when they've got a great car, like the MCL 39. But they have taken the front row of the grid. Oscar Piastri on the pole from Lando Norris, and Max Verstappen third in the Red Bull right at the end, struggling a little bit to get the car up to speed, get the balance right for the grip level that he has. But in the end, it is the two McLarens from Max and then George Russell. Kimi Antonelli also backing up George Russell's very good performance for Mercedes by a top 6 qualifying as well. Lewis Hamilton quicker than Charles Leclerc on this occasion, but mainly because Charles ran out of soft tyres. He used too many to get to where he needed to be in qualifying. So yeah, good result for Lewis in that respect. A big question mark though as to why Charles went out early on that one and only set of new softs that he had in Q3. Why not save it until the end, as Fernando Alonso did? He only had one set as well. And Fernando did a very good job in the Aston Martin to get into the top 10 as well. So slight question mark there on the strategy of Charles Leclerc. I don't really understand that at all. There was a threat of rain, but it wasn't raining at the time. And as I say, Fernando Alonso didn't get lured into making that mistake. Anyway, getting back to the front of the grid, we saw some good action today. Oscar and Lando pretty much as we called it yesterday. Oscar quite aggressive with his steering and his input, asking quite a lot of the car out of 2 into 3, but he's right on top of the car. He's got a great balance and he's got great car control and feel, and he was getting away with it really quick throughout the lap. Lando Norris, though, making small mistakes. It all started in FP3 today, really. Typical Lando thing, just sort of building up from them when he was on a quick lap. Right at the end, FP3, when they went out on soft tyres just to see how they were going to go in qualifying. And Lando was on a good lap, but then had some sort of bouncing episode going through turn 9, lost the rear, did a very good job of just immediately releasing the steering. And I didn't even know there was an escape road there, but went down the escape road on the outside of 9 rather than going over all the dirt and destroying the floor, and fed his way back onto the lap again. But that kind of put him behind the music. Obviously, he was then second to Oscar going into qualifying, and Oscar was just quicker thereafter, basically all the time. Really good job by Oscar Piastri. And speaking of Fernando, I just got to say, really nice through turn 2 and 3 as well for Fernando Alonso. But the other Spaniard, Carlos Sainz in the Williams, didn't even make it out of Q1 on this occasion, whereas Alex Albon, his teammate, did. So it's now 4-3 to Albon in terms of qualifying. You know, Carlos chose to go to Williams because this was the most competitive car he felt he could find on the grid that was available. I said at the time, I felt he'd be much better off going to Audi because it's a long-term brand that he could build a future with. And at the same time, with Jonathan Wheatley going there was absolutely every reason to think that the team would be better than it was in 2024. And so it proved. Gabriel Bortoleto actually got into Q2 in the car that Carlos Sainz could have been driving had he gone to Audi. But he didn't get out of Q1. Admittedly, Carlos was held up in the traffic jam behind Colapinto in the pit lane. We should have been going out in the closing minutes of Q1, but it shouldn't have been cut so fine. And of course, all that was a function of having to give his car up to Victor Martins in FP1. So it's a great shame for Carlos and very disappointing for him at his home Grand Prix. Anyway, as I also said yesterday, it is quite difficult to look at the Barcelona lap. If you've got no graphics on screen, you don't know how quickly they're actually going. It's quite difficult when you look at the cars on track to distinguish one driver's style from another because they appear to be line locked most of the time. In my opinion, that turn 2, turn 3 section is the most interesting, the most creative, and that's where you see the most differences. But again, we didn't get to see much of that because of the way they're running the TV at this Grand Prix this weekend. So on this occasion, I thought it might be interesting to look at to analyze the laps of the first 3 in qualifying in terms of what they were doing at certain points, identical points, on all corners around the lap. It's a lot of numbers there, but they're all pretty accurate as far as I can make them anyway. And it starts with the speed trap at the beginning of the lap, which is before the braking area into turn 1. And then you see all the turn numbers, and then right at the end, the speed and the gear, and the gear next to the speed, what they're doing as they go through the start-finish line. So if we first of all compare Oscar with Lando and see where Oscar got ahead of Lando and where that lap time came from. Just over 2/10 is a lot. McLaren-Mercedes in a very good car around Barcelona, a circuit that both drivers know like the back of their hand, and yet Oscar blew Lando away. There's no other word to describe it today. So at the beginning of the lap, and I've got to say here, the Red Bull obviously is using its tyres more, as any car would if it doesn't have the same sufficient downforce level as its opposition. The one thing that's going to happen straight away is you're going to overheat the tyres in trying to extract the best from it. And we'll get onto it in a minute. But quite obviously, whilst the McLaren drivers could run the soft tyre at an optimum in all 3 sectors, Max had to pick and choose how he was going to put the lap together. As I say, we'll get onto that when we analyse his speeds as well. But just looking at the difference between Oscar and Lando through the speed trap, 328, 327, nothing in it there really. That was quite an amusing cameo at the beginning of Q3, in the first phase of Q3. That's not what we're looking at here when they're running the soft tyres for the first time in Q3 when Oscar Piastri passed Lando, who was on a slow lap. He's on his out lap, and Lando didn't hold him up. But then as they came down towards the end, Lando started to speed up, and the McLaren team said to Oscar as he crossed the line, slow down because Lando's now on a push lap. And of course that gave Lando a nice tow. 2 kilometers an hour he got on that, which he didn't get then in the second run when it really mattered, when they were going a little bit quicker. Bear in mind the track is a little bit quicker in the second part of qualifying. Again, I raised my point about why did Charles Leclerc not wait until this last part of Q3 to do it. Anyway, through the speed trap, 328, 327, not much in it. Turn 1, 168 Oscar Piastri, and exactly the same point Lando Norris is doing 174. That would suggest, actually, contrary to what I was saying yesterday, that Oscar's braking a fraction earlier into turn 1. Now, this could well be that he's thinking by now, yesterday to today, he's thinking the way to get the best from these tyres is to take it a little bit easier through sector 1 and really focus on sectors 2 and 3, which is actually what Max Verstappen had to do right at the end as well. So maybe that's what we're seeing here. And as a result, turn 2, 195, mid-corner speed for Oscar, 199 for Lando Norris, and he's still in fourth gear. He's got more revs on the car and he's pushing the car more, fourth gear at 199, whereas Oscar is going into a higher gear and keeping the car more relaxed, more settled, if you like, and that's a nice thing to see. And look at what's happened as a result of getting that gear early and keeping the revs a little bit lower through turn 3. At a certain point in turn 3, he's doing 258 in 7th, whereas Lando, who actually had the quicker exit, is doing 257 in 7th, a little bit slow. So he's lost a little bit of a speed advantage by going for more revs and holding that gear for longer. Turn 4, which is the long right-hander, 168. Oscar, again, you could argue maybe taking a little bit easier than Lando, but very similar through there once it's a long corner. So I say similar, 2 kilometers over a long corner, not that much. Turn 5, of course, is the hairpin, the left hand. This is the exit of turn 5. And there, again, Lando's on the power pretty well, 165 compared with Oscar, 163. So on the basis of that, you have to say Lando definitely looks as if he's on the quicker lap at the moment. Now they're coming down into turn 6. That's that downhill left-hander. And what we got there for turn 6 is the entry to that area. Oscar 256, Lando 257. So again, Lando is quick there. Turn 7, which is the left-hander, the exit of the left-hander. Oscar 165 in fourth gear, Lando 161 in fourth gear. Now, and I guess that's a little bit of Oscar not being so quick in, but just being really good on the way he's getting on the power. So that's impressive to see. Turn 8, which is not really a corner, 215 to 211. That's more a measurement of the speed out of turn 7. Then going into turn 9, identical, 263, 263. So nothing there, although Lando did lose the back end in FP3. He's now completely settled. So through turn 9, exactly the same, very, very quick right-hander. Just a slight lift after they get 7th gear, both doing exactly the same thing there. Into turn 10, the hairpin, exactly the same as Lando and Max, 119 in third gear, 119 kilometers an hour in third gear. As they come through turn 11, which is flat out, it's just a kink. Oscar's doing 217 compared with Lando at 210. And I would say that's more Lando having made some sort of mistake going into the hairpin. So then we get into turn 12. Again, Oscar's looking really, really good through turn 12, which is the long right-hander, double apex right-hander as well, 143 at a point where Lando's doing 139. Turn 13 is the first of the 2 quick right-handers at the end of the lap. 254, 254, absolutely identical. But then look at 14. This is the last corner, the quick right-hander, which leads onto the straight. 273 for Lando Norris, doing what he always does, getting 7th gear and then just backing off slightly before he goes into the corner. And Oscar Piastri doing exactly the same thing, but just the back off for Oscar Piastri is just boom, boom, like that. Whereas Lando's going like that. It's slightly longer off the throttle, and that makes the difference for him. And as you go across the start-finish line, Oscar's picked up that little bit of speed, 305 compared to 302. The result is pole position by approximately 0.2 of a second. So that's just a brilliant lap by Oscar Piastri and puts him in great shape for the race tomorrow, because if he is going to be using the tyres a little bit harder, because he does drive on the rear more than Lando, although it's the left front that tends to go first at Barcelona, he's going to be in free air, providing he makes a good start, which I'm sure he will. He's going to be in free air, and he can drive the races he wants to protect the tyres. Now let's have a look at Max Verstappen. Max was not particularly quick in the first phase of Q3, and any speed he had disappeared as the lap went on. So it's pretty clear that in his mind, he was thinking as he went out for this second and last run that he would take it a little bit easier through the first sector. And the first sector, I've got to say, runs up to turn 4, and the second sector ends just before turn 10. But the interesting point is that nonetheless, Max did about the same time in sector 1 in both phases of qualifying, right at the end as well. But bearing in mind the track was quicker, and he was going quicker anyway, the car was, I don't know, whatever they do to the car for that last run, when they always go quicker, Max in reality was going slower in sector 1 because he was just doing the same time that he'd done when the car wasn't in quite the same form, or the track wasn't as quick anyway. So let's look at it. Speed trap. This is a Red Bull McLaren MCL 39 comparison now, post the Spanish Grand Prix flexi wing test. This is it for the rest of the year. Where are we at? RB21 through the speed trap 327, McLaren 327 as well. Well, Oscar 328, but there or thereabouts. This is a lot to do with the amount of downforce they're running. It's a high downforce circuit. And you got to say there, in terms of drag, I guess you got to say the Red Bull is running about the same amount of drag as the McLaren. But quite obviously, for the wing setup it has and the downforce it's generating underneath, it doesn't have the same overall grip, aero grip, as the McLaren. And that will hurt it in terms of overheating the tyres, imbalance, and various other things. So as they go into turn 1, Max braking earlier, as you would expect. He always does. 163 compared to Oscar's 168 compared to Lando's 174 at exactly the same place. Then that he holds that 197. Yeah, he's not going quickly in sector 1, is what you're saying. 255. He's slower than both of them. Turn 3. 161. Turn 4. I would say turn 4 is potentially the worst corner for the Red Bull McLaren fight at Barcelona, because it's such a long corner. And if the tyres are going to overheat, it's going to be turn 4. And you need a lot of grip and downforce there. There's not much you can do as a driver. You just get into it and you just sit there on this long right-hander. Really boring corner, actually. I've tried to watch it turn 4 on many occasions, and I've never found a place there where you can actually see what the cars are doing or what the drivers are doing. I've never, inside or outside, I just find it a really frustrating corner. Anyway, exit of turn 5, which is just starting to go down the hill. He's dancing with the music now, 166. He's starting to think, right, I got that. I've looked after the tyres now, so we're at 166 there. That's not bad, is it? 258 out of turn 6, pretty good. 158, and then he's very slow through turn 7, which suggests that the traction, or there's something about the car there. Maybe it's a bouncing thing as he's coming up the hill through that point, that as he's coming out of that section, that tight section, there's something there that the Red Bull doesn't like. Maybe it's a bump, maybe it's a curb that he can't use that the McLarens have. Turn 8, which is, I say, effectively the kink, and it's just a reflection on how you've gone through that 6-7 section. Look where he is, 204. Not much he can do about that, I suspect. I've never seen a driver be able to do anything about that section. If you're slow there, you can't really use short corners. All you can do is be as sensitive as Max is. Turn 9, 265. Yeah, good on you, Max. Incredibly quick through turn 9. Also backing off just a fraction in 7th, but look at that. That's just pin sharp perfect to be that quick. Mid-corner, really, really impressive. Turn 10, same speed as Lando and Oscar. You know, Max, very slow rotation, and then getting the car dead straight. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me to see Max at 219, quicker than both McLaren drivers. At turn 11, that's a classic reward that a driver like Max Verstappen gets for getting the car rotated perfectly. 137 through turn 12, yeah, not very good, but again, that's mid-corner rotation speed. He's not very quick there. Don't read too much into that. Turn 13, disappointing, 250 for Max, and that's, I guess, just coming out of that corner. The car's not very good. Maybe the tyres are starting to overheat again. It's not feeling great. The downforce is starting to build up. But it's not a quick time, is it? Speed 250. Then turn 14, look at that. He nonetheless recovers, even though he's 4 kilometers down coming out of 13. He's exactly the same speed in the middle of 14. And you know why? He went through absolutely flat out in 7th gear, did not lift one iota going into the last corner. So all the Max Verstappen fans out there who probably are in a state of shock seeing all these speeds here, you can rejoice in that Max Verstappen, Mr. Short Corner, Mr. Sensitivity, when it came to that long right-hander on the last lap, absolutely flat. Now, I don't want to take the glory away from Max at all, but only one other driver that I've analysed and gone through did exactly the same thing, and that driver was Pierre Gasly. I mean, this guy is really good. Flat through that last right-hander in an Alpine. Wow. Very impressive. So anyway, there we are. That's Max nursing the tyres really through Sector 1. I'd like to say, oh yeah, but he was mega quick in Sector 1 in Phase 1. If you add that to the 2 sector times, he could have been on the pole, but it's not the case. Actually, he did a 21.4, as you can see there. These are the 3 sector times on those laps, on the laps that took them to the first 3 positions on the grid. So Max's overall lap time wouldn't have changed that much. George Russell, I checked on George to see whether he was flat through the last corner as well, because if anybody else was going to be flat, I thought it'd be George, but he does have a slight lift through that last corner. Very good job though, 11.8. Lewis Hamilton, delighted I think to be 12.0, still taking quite wide entries, not looking like the Lewis that was super good in the Mercedes and the McLaren around Barcelona, but nonetheless, you know, he's leaving a bit of margin with that late turn in, and he's able to do more with the tyres, a trick he learned I guess at Mercedes. So he should be in reasonable shape tomorrow. He'll be delighted anyway to be the quicker of the 2 Ferrari drivers. Kimi Antonelli, very good job, 12.1. Pierre Gasly, as I say, 12.1 as well. Isack Hadjar, again, quicker than Liam Lawson. I mean, that's becoming a pattern, obviously. And again, you got to say, if he's doing a 12.2 in the Racing Bulls and Max Verstappen's doing an 11.8, then, you know, the Racing Bulls still looks to be a quicker car than the RB21 right now. And they don't seem to have made much progress. It's about exactly where everybody, well, certainly where Red Bull were relative to McLaren and Mercedes, really. Everything's just the same, despite all those FIA tests, all the talk. Fernando Alonso, very good job to get into the top 10. Bortoleto, as I say, Alex Albon and the other Williams got through into Q2. And so, as did Oliver Behrman, very good job by him. Esteban Ocon did not. And Carlos Sainz and Yuki Tsunoda. I mean, what is going on with Yuki Tsunoda in the other car? It's like that other Red Bull is non-existent. It's obviously such a difficult car to drive. And that really does bring into focus what Max is doing, I think. And at the risk of this sounding like a, you know, Max Verstappen is brilliant thing, you've got to say, teammate to teammate, Max Verstappen's performance is absolutely amazing. Yeah, big thanks to OEM Exclusive, to Track Ninja and to Jetcraft. Thanks for watching. Let's see what happens in the Spanish Grand Prix tomorrow. Take care. What we saw in Barcelona were the 2 faces of Max Verstappen. On the one hand, a totally brilliant drive in a Red Bull Honda that was nothing like as quick as a McLaren-Mercedes over the Grand Prix distance of the Spanish Grand Prix, or ever individual lap, actually. Sector 2 was never, ever going to be any good for Red Bull in Barcelona. But on the other side of the coin, towards the end of the race, after a safety car deployment, the race restart with 6 laps to go, Max went absolutely ballistic and ended up with a 10-second penalty, which dropped him down to P10. It's not that Max would care at that point, because already he'd dropped from third, a very, very good third behind the 2 McLarens, down to P5. So in order to work out exactly what happened between those 2 Maxes, we need to look at the various stages of the race. The race began with McLaren-Mercedes accentuating their advantage by starting on new soft tyres. Max Verstappen, like most of the others on the grid, was on a used set of softs, so there was no way in the world, really, that either McLaren driver should have been beaten by anybody into turn 1, and that definitely proved to be the case for Oscar Piastri from the pole. Absolutely superb, even though there was a very, very short time at this race between the reds coming on and then going out. Oscar Piastri, as I say, absolutely brilliant from the pole. But behind him, 3 abreast, Max Verstappen, who'd made a very good start, was on the left, on the outside. In other words, Lando Norris in the middle, hadn't made a great start. And George Russell to his right, not right up with those 2, but nonetheless making it 3 abreast going into turn 1. And of course, it was Max Verstappen that did the most beautiful pass around the outside and got up into second place. It took Lando Norris 4 or 5, 6 laps eventually to get past Max, which he was going to do because the tyres went off quickly on the Red Bull. It then looked like everyone would fall into the pattern of starting on the soft tyres, going to the medium, and then maybe having another medium or maybe a soft tyre towards the end of the race. But Red Bull made a good call at this point and put Max onto his one and only set of new soft tyres. And as a result of that, and some brilliant driving, some fabulous passing around the outside, people like Antonelli around the outside of turn 12, really impressive to watch, Max found himself in a very, very solid P3, putting pressure on the McLarens as the race started to unfold, 2/3 distance, well clear of Charles Leclerc, who was never really a threat in the Ferrari, who got the advantage over Lewis Hamilton early on. We'll get onto that a little bit further into the video. So Max is in a very clear P3. They're all on used softs at this time. Max has had to make his final stop as well. And for a while, he's catching Lando Norris, but then it settles down. And it is clear he's going to finish third, probably 3 or 4 seconds behind Lando. But then, with 6 laps to go, effectively by the time they restarted, Kimi Antonelli pulled to a halt at turn 10, or drove off the track at turn 10, smoke pouring out the back of his Mercedes, low oil pressure, and parked the car there. This put out the safety car, deployed the safety car for about 4 laps. And at this point, with Max in P3, and he's on the soft tyre, and potentially there's only going to be 6-7 laps to go, you would think that Red Bull would then say, wow, we've earned this position, we'll keep him out there and keep track position, we'll stay out. An obvious call, particularly as they saw both Piastri and Lando Norris coming into the pits for used soft tyres. They didn't have any new sets left. But unbelievably, in possibly the worst call ever made in the history of Formula One strategy, they brought Max Verstappen in as well, and they put him on a set of new hard tyres with only 6 laps of the race to go. It was unbelievable. It was incomprehensible, really. Bearing in mind the obvious thing was to leave him out in the first place, and at worst he was going to finish third. But if you're going to change tyres, put him onto another set of soft used like everybody else. Why put him onto hard tyres? Max, as he's accelerating out of the pit lane, got onto the radio straight away and said, what tyres are these? And you could hear the sort of panic in his voice. And they said, oh, it's hard tyres, Max. And he said, well, why am I on hard tyres? And they said there was no option, which, well, either Pirelli have got it wrong or Red Bull have got it wrong, because Pirelli made it very clear going into the start of this Grand Prix that Max Verstappen had 3 sets of used soft tyres still to use in the race. Now, I suppose it could be that that third set, because he'd run 2 used sets already, I suppose it could be that that third set was very worn and had no grip in it, or was faulty or something like that. But I think Pirelli would change a tyre if things weren't right. Pirelli wouldn't put out a statement saying that Max had 3 used sets of tyres, soft tyres, unless it was accurate. And yet that set of soft tyres was kept in the garage, and they shouldn't have brought him in anyway. As a result, he's on hard tyres. You can see Max, he's a sitting duck. He's got Charles Leclerc behind him, who's on a used set of softs. And then behind him, George Russell in the Mercedes, also on a used set of softs. And there's Max Verstappen on the hard tyre. And he's doing like this behind the safety car, doing all he can to get temperature into the tyres. And eventually the safety car pulls in. The first real corner is the last corner, turn 14. Max guns it. And the back end, at the exit of 14, does that on the Red Bull. And it's the most unbelievable save, the most amazing car control and reflexes you're ever going to see at high speed on a high-speed corner. Just brilliant recovery by Max. But of course, it lost him time. And Charles Leclerc was alongside him as they went past the start-finish line, and then moved over on him at about 330 kilometers an hour before the braking area into turn 1 and hit the Red Bull. Max stays absolutely straight, and you can see clearly from the overhead shot that Charles just drives into him. One of the most dangerous things I've seen since Lance Stroll did that to Fernando Alonso in Austin a few years back. Anything on the straight should be jumped upon immediately. I've got a massive amount of respect for Charles Leclerc, and I'm not sure he did this deliberately, but he hit Max Verstappen at 330 kilometers an hour. It was inexcusable, just terrible. Anyways, they're going into turn 1. Max is sort of a bit shell-shocked by what's happened there, and George Russell's now inside him, and Max tries to sort of squeeze him out and doesn't succeed, and takes the escape road out of turn 1, avoiding turn 2, and rejoins in front of George Russell. In his mind, George was never in front, and he should keep position. Of course, this is where the sporting regulations came into play. And obviously at this point, there was a lot of discussion on the Red Bull pit wall, and it wasn't good, because they came to their own decision that they should tell Max to give the position back to George. Meanwhile, the FIA stewards were looking at exactly that situation and deciding they wouldn't take any further action. So there was no need even to tell Max to give the position back to George. That compounds, obviously, everything that went wrong thereafter. So you can imagine now he's on the hard tyre when he's driven one of the best races of his career to be where he is in P3 behind the 2 McLarens. Red Bull made a massive strategy mistake. Charles Leclerc's he's had the massive moment out of turn 14. Charles Leclerc's almost caused a massive accident on the straight. And now George Russell has got past, and he's got to give the position back to George Russell, his arch rival. So you can imagine how Max felt at this point. And this is why he went totally ballistic. When he was told eventually, yes, you've got to give the position back to George, he just hung, I shouldn't be laughing. He hung back coming out of turn 4, let George pass, and then tried to T-bone George out of the race. I think in Max's mind, I'm only trying to think what he was thinking. He was thinking, well, Charles nearly took me out at 330. If I was in the wrong with George going into turn 1, we're talking about something at, 50, 60 miles an hour. They're taking no action on the Charles thing, and I've got to give the position back to George for what happened at 50, 60 miles an hour. What is going on in this world? And of course, all the holier than thous and all the cynics are already saying out there, Max should be banned. Max is typical Max Verstappen. This is why he's never going to. To me, it was just the flip side of everything he'd done that afternoon, just being thrown back in his face. And the real culprit, ultimately, was Red Bull themselves, the team. I cannot, even as I speak, I'm absolutely stupefied that they made that call to bring him in. Why didn't they leave him out? He's on a used set of softs. Yeah, probably Oscar Piastri would have got him in, but the DRS didn't come into play until the last 3 laps. Possibly Oscar would have got him. I don't think Lando would have got him. I think he would have been second. He might have been third at worst, but he for sure would have beaten Charles Leclerc and George Russell. So what were Red Bull thinking? I just have no idea. Completely lost by strategy. And if you want a full stop at the end of that sentence, think about this. Jonathan Wheatley, one of the key people of Red Bull Racing who've kept that team what it is over the years, responsible in many ways for all the great calls that have been made in the pit lane, on the pit wall, the way they've worked in the garage, the number of record pit stops they've had at Red Bull. Jonathan Wheatley should take a lot of credit for that. Jonathan Wheatley now at Sauber, he decided to leave Red Bull 2/3 of the way through last year. He's now well entrenched at Sauber, Audi next year. Guess what? His driver, Nico Hulkenberg, finished 5th. This is the team, I've got to say, in an aside, that I thought Carlos Sainz should be going to, but no, he went to Williams and had a dismal day yet again. Got to say that. Anyway, that to one side. Jonathan Wheatley doing at Sauber what he was doing at Red Bull just imploding. I mean, what a ridiculous call. I don't know how many times I'm going to say it in this video, but I cannot believe they made that call after all the hard work that had been done in that race, not only by Max, but it was a very good call, I think, to put him onto a new set of softs at the first pit stop. I think it confused everybody, McLaren particularly. And of course it did work because he almost came out in front of Lando Norris when it all neutralized back into how they were going to race towards the finish. He was almost in front. And for a couple of laps, he was within a second of Lando when the traffic got involved. But no, he was going to be third, a very good third, much closer than Ferrari or Mercedes could even have dreamt about. But then the safety car came out and then it changed everything. And then Red Bull took it upon themselves to tell Max to give the position back to George. They didn't even wait for the steward's decision on that. I think if Jonathan Wheatley was still at Red Bull, I cannot imagine in a million years that that call would have been put out on the radio to Max to do that. It's one of these small things on which hinge an entirely new story. 10-second penalty, of course, that's a massive penalty when you're given to a closely bunched field as it was because of the safety car. 10 seconds drops you from the lead to last, it could be. It was a fairly blatant thing by Max, and of course that'll be replayed and replayed and replayed. And George used it to his maximum. I feel the car is damaged, this and that. Mind you, George at the start of the race he made a very good start. As I said, he was triumvirate going into turn 1. But then he sort of backed off and got passed by 2 or 3. He got passed by Lewis Hamilton, actually. Nice pass by Lewis. So it was a difficult first phase of the race. And for the first couple of laps, he was complaining about other drivers, Lewis and particularly, I guess, moving under braking and things going on. To which Toto Wolff quite correctly got on the radio and said, George, just concentrate. The car was obviously not very good on full tanks, but George drove well, as he always would. But yeah, getting on to Ferrari now, Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton, no excuse now really in terms of tyres. They both started on used softs, and quite early on, Charles clearly was quicker than Lewis Hamilton, shorter corners, just doing everything more neatly. Lewis sort of just looking clumsy in the car, and Charles got him. And then shortly afterwards, they brought Lewis in. This is at the beginning of the race, and put him onto a new set of mediums. And Lewis said, "Well, why have I been brought in so early?" And it wasn't that early, but I think that was Lewis basically saying, the only reason Charles Leclerc passed me is because I was looking after the tyres. I wanted them to do a really long first stint. I thought that's what we planned to do. And now you brought me in early and it's kind of ruined my race. I think that's what the translation was of what Lewis was trying to say. So again, question marks at Ferrari about why isn't everybody on the same page? It just seems incredible to me that the drivers like Lewis can constantly be asking questions about why he's coming early or this and that. Surely they're talking about that before the race, all these different contingencies. What happens if Charles is quicker than me and I have to let him pass? Should I then come in for tyres or should I try and extend the stint? Not difficult to have those conversations. I suppose Lewis never wants to think about Charles being quicker than he is on the same tyres. I guess it comes down to that. So anyway, let's have a look at the final results. Fairly breathless video, this one, because those two sides of Max were just astonishing, really. And I think this race will be, I mean, sadly, I think this race will be remembered for all that stuff that happened with 6 laps to go before the checkered flag. And very few people will talk about what Max was doing in the early stage of the race, or how well Oscar Piastri drove in control of the race and blew Lando away, or some other good drives. I think it'll all be remembered for Max and his red mist, which is sad because there's a lot more going on. If nothing else, this race should be remembered for his car control coming out of 14 on those cold, hard tyres when the back end snapped out. And you've seen so many drivers overcorrect there, and you have a moment, and you can actually have a big shunt on the inside into the pit wall. And we've seen that many times. Indeed, that's one of the reasons they made turn 14 a chicane, because that had been happening so much. But Max, just fabulous car control. We don't often see that, so those reflexes from Max, but there they were on display. So Oscar Piastri, Lando Norris, 1-2 for McLaren. Congratulations to them. And the weekend when the FIA was supposed to be restoring parity and taking all the flexi-wing elements out of Formula One and thus making it much more competitive again, and McLaren would be back there with Red Bull, Mercedes and Ferrari, well, none of that happened. They're the only team that made no changes to their car whatsoever, and they still blitzed the opposition, finished 1-2, very good. Charles Leclerc, P3, after a disappointing qualifying. Still no explanation as to why he didn't do his one and only Q3 lap at the end of the session rather than at the first, but we'll put that to one side. He did go into the race with 2 sets of new mediums, and that stood him in good stead. George Russell, P4. Max would have been P5, an incredibly disgruntled, annoyed P5, but instead he was an incredibly disgruntled P10. So then Nico Hulkenberg finished 5th in the Jonathan Wheatley run car. The only driver that I can see who actually ran new tyres on every stint. Partly because he didn't get to use too many where they qualified, but nonetheless, he was right on it, on a new set of softs at the end, beat Lewis Hamilton. So, yeah, impressive. Sauber beat Ferrari around Barcelona. Nico Hulkenberg beat Lewis Hamilton. Isack Hadjar, another great result for him in the Racing Bulls behind Lewis. Another one. I mean, this guy just gets better and better. Head and shoulders above Liam Lawson yet again, who had lots of incidents in traffic. Pierre Gasly, who I think still overperformed in the Alpine Renault, finished ahead of Fernando Alonso, who didn't seem to have any new tyres at all, the other end of extreme, and went round and round in the Aston Martin. Did some good passes too, and finished 9th. Max Verstappen eventually classified 10th. Liam Lawson out of the points, 11th. Bortoleto did well, finished 12th. Yuki Tsunoda sort of made a little bit of ground, P13, and Carlos Sainz nowhere, sadly. So yeah, very, very disappointing day for Carlos Sainz. As I say, should have been in the Jonathan Wheatley car. Anyway, too late to say that now. So there we are. I suppose in some ways we can say an amazingly human race, because on the one hand, as I say, we saw Max Verstappen at his versatile, brilliant best in a difficult car. Various stages of the race, he was talking about the gear shift, the upshift being slow. This is a problem Red Bull seem to have had for a long time now at various stages of the weekend. And in addition, of course, when he was on the used softs, very quickly they went off and he wasn't able to do much with the turn into the car, turning in on the brakes, something he does incredibly well. Wasn't able to do that at all on the slow corners, which is why he was always so slow in Sector 2. But when he had reasonable grip because of the downforce, he was really quick. Unbelievably quick, really, in that car, that RB21 in Sectors 1 and 3. But then it all changed, I must say. We saw you toss of the coin there. That was tails. Now we go to heads, and it's Max Verstappen with the red mist. Absolutely ropeable, as probably some of the Australian supporters of Oscar Piastri would say. I think a lot of snickering up and down the pit lane as well when Max was doing all that and he got his penalty. And I think that's fairly typical of Formula One as well. Everybody likes to band together, and the basic consensus is that Max Verstappen's a madman, or whatever they want to say. And I don't think anybody really has a rounded view of what racing drivers are all about. I've known plenty of racing drivers lose their cool over things like that. Indeed, if racing drivers don't lose their cool over things like that, you could say shouldn't really be in the job. This isn't a gentleman's sport in the sense that they're all professional Formula One drivers. Well, it is. There's a lot of professional Formula One drivers out there. There's a lot of drivers that love posing for the crowd and the beautiful people on either arm. There's lots of drivers who go in for that. But Max isn't that. He definitely isn't that. He is, above all, just a racing driver. And what we saw was the soft underbelly of the racing driver today. So I would say don't give him too hard a time. He's got his penalty, and celebrate what he actually did in the race car when he was on the right set of tyres before Red Bull messed it all up with probably the most ridiculous strategy call in the history of ridiculous strategy calls. I wonder who did make that call. I mean, they've got a strategy department, haven't they? A well-known, famous strategy department. But I can't believe that something that important would have been left just to the strategy people. Surely the race engineering team would have overseen that. Surely whoever is doing Jonathan Wheatley's job, if there is anybody doing Jonathan Wheatley's job, would have got on top of that and said, no, leave him out. What are you guys talking about? Maybe nobody is at Red Bull anymore who can play that role. I don't know. If nothing else, Christian Horner should be doing that. If they haven't replaced Jonathan's brain with somebody with that sort of feel. So anyway, there we are. Big thanks to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, to Track Ninja, and of course to REC Watchers. Thanks to them. Big thanks to you, the viewer, for watching. We'll be back with some live streams pretty soon, although I am off early next week to Sardinia for the Rally Italia Sardinia. Looking forward to that very much, but I'll be talking to Cameron tomorrow as we look back on the Monday morning at this tumultuous, is that the right word? Spanish Grand Prix at Barcelona. See you then.